The evening wind carried the scent of rain as Zane Fitzgerald gazed out the window of his weathered cabin, his calloused hands clutching a faded photograph of a woman whose smile would never again brighten his days. The year was 1879, and the Montana Territory offered little comfort to a man left alone to raise 3 young children in the unforgiving wilderness they called home. "Pa," Emily's crying again. His oldest, 10-year-old Thomas, announced from the doorway of the small bedroom where his siblings slept. Zane set down the photograph, running a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at 32. "I'll see to her," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Since Martha's passing in childbirth 8 months ago, conversation had become a luxury he rarely indulged in. The cabin, once filled with Martha's laughter and singing, had fallen silent except for the children's voices and the occasional crackle from the wood stove. Outside, the sky darkened as storm clouds gathered over the mountains that surrounded their small ranch. 20 acres, a dozen cattle, and 3 horses were all that stood between his family and starvation. He lifted little Emily from her crib, her face red from crying, her tiny fists balled in protest. At 8 months old, she was the spitting image of her mother, the same honey-colored hair and bright blue eyes that had captured Zane's heart 12 years earlier. "S-H-H, little one," he whispered, bouncing her gently as he paced the floor. 6-year-old Sarah watched from her bed, her thumb in her mouth, a habit she'd resumed after her mother died. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sparse cabin interior, followed quickly by a crack of thunder that made Sarah whimper. Thomas, trying his best to be the man of the house when his father's grief overwhelmed him, put an arm around his sister. "It's just the angels bowling," he told her, repeating what their mother used to say during storms. The rain began, pelting the roof in an urgent rhythm. Emily eventually quieted, her tiny head resting against Zane's shoulder as he continued to pace. His stomach growled, reminding him that he'd given most of his dinner to the children. The larder was growing bare, and tomorrow he'd need to ride into town for supplies, dragging all 3 children along since there was no one to watch them. A sudden knock at the door startled him. Visitors were rare, especially in such weather and at this hour. Zane reached for the rifle that hung above the door, balancing Emily in one arm. "Who's there?" he called, his finger resting near the trigger. "Hello," a woman's voice, barely audible over the rain. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but my wagon broke down on the road. I saw your light." Zane hesitated, then set the rifle aside but within reach. In these parts, kindness to strangers was both a duty and a risk. He opened the door a crack, revealing a young woman drenched from the storm, her dark hair plastered to her face, rainwater dripping from her cloak. "I'm terribly sorry," she said, her teeth chattering slightly. "I was heading to Willow Creek when my wheel broke. I've been walking for miles, and yours was the first house I found." In her hands, she clutched a cloth-covered bundle. I brought bread. It's still warm, I think." Zane stared at her for a moment, taking in her rain-soaked appearance and the earnest expression in her deep brown eyes. Something in those eyes, a mixture of determination and vulnerability, reminded him of Martha on the day they'd first met. "Come in before you catch your death," he said finally, stepping back to allow her entry. She crossed the threshold, bringing with her the scent of rain and, improbably, freshly baked bread. As she pushed back her hood, Zane was struck by her beauty, not the delicate kind that Martha had possessed, but something stronger, more resilient. "I'm Joanna Oakes," she said, offering a small smile as she unwrapped the bread. "Thank you for letting me in." "Zane Fitzgerald," he replied, adjusting Emily in his arms. "These are my children Thomas, Sarah, and Emily." Joanna's eyes softened as they fell on the baby. "She's beautiful." Before Zane could respond, Emily reached out toward Joanna, her tiny fingers grasping at the air. The gesture surprised him. Emily was typically wary of strangers. "May I?" Joanna asked, setting the bread on the table. After a moment's hesitation, Zane nodded and carefully transferred Emily to Joanna's arms. The woman cradled the baby with practiced ease, cooing softly as she rocked her. "You have experience with children," Zane observed. "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed," she explained, her eyes never leaving Emily's face. "5 of them, all boys." Thomas approached cautiously, eyeing the bread. "Is that really for us?" Joanna smiled. "It certainly is. I baked it this morning before leaving my brother's home in Helena." "Helena?" Zane frowned. "That's nearly 40 miles from here." "Yes," she sighed. "I was to start a new position as a schoolteacher in Willow Creek tomorrow. Now I fear I'll be late if I can get there at all." Sarah had crept closer, drawn by the stranger who held her baby sister with such tenderness. "You're pretty," she declared suddenly. A blush colored Joanna's cheeks. "Thank you, sweetheart. You're quite pretty yourself." Zane cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the cabin's disheveled state clothes needing washing, dishes piled in the basin, dust gathering on every surface. Martha would have been mortified. "I'll make some coffee," he said, moving toward the stove. "And you can tell me more about this broken wagon of yours. Maybe I can help fix it come morning." As he busied himself with the coffee pot, he watched from the corner of his eye as Joanna sat at the table, Emily still in her arms, engaging Thomas and Sarah in quiet conversation. There was something about her presence that filled the empty spaces in the cabin spaces that had been void of warmth since Martha's passing. The bread, when they sliced into it, was indeed still warm in the center, and the aroma of it brought a comfort Zane hadn't realized he'd been missing. As the storm raged outside, the 4 of them 5, counting baby Emily, sat around the small table, eating bread with the last of the preserves Martha had put up the previous summer. "This is the best thing I've eaten in months," Zane admitted after his first bite. "Pa doesn't cook so good," Thomas added matter-of-factly, earning a rare chuckle from his father. "Well," Joanna said, glancing around the cabin, "perhaps I could help with that while I'm here. It seems the least I could do in return for your shelter." Zane looked up sharply. "You cook?" "Among other things," she replied with a small smile. "I may be on my way to teach school, Mr. Fitzgerald, but I was raised on a farm. I can cook, clean, mend, and even help with the livestock if needed." He studied her for a moment, noting the quiet confidence in her posture despite her bedraggled appearance. "Just how long are you planning to stay, Miss Oakes?" "Only until I can get to Willow Creek," she assured him. "Though I suppose that depends on how quickly your roads dry out and how soon my wagon can be repaired." Outside, the rain showed no signs of letting up, and Zane found himself not minding the prospect of this unexpected guest remaining for a day or two. It had been so long since there had been a woman's touch in this home. "You can take my bed," he offered. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Oh, I couldn't possibly. I insist," he said firmly. "The children and I are used to making do." Later, after the children were tucked into bed and Joanna had retired to his room, Zane sat before the dying embers of the fire, his thoughts in turmoil. The arrival of this woman had stirred something within him, not just memories of Martha, but a reminder of what their life had been before tragedy struck. He'd been merely existing these past 8 months, focused only on survival. The photograph of Martha sat on the mantel, her gentle eyes seeming to watch him. "What would you have me do?" he whispered to her image. As always, there was no answer, only the pattering of rain on the roof and the soft breathing of his unexpected guest in the next room. Morning brought a change in the weather, with sunlight streaming through the windows and steam rising from the puddles outside. Zane woke to the unfamiliar smell of cooking and the sound of quiet humming. For a disorienting moment, he thought Martha had returned, that the past 8 months had been a terrible dream. Reality settled back as he sat up on his bedroll near the hearth. The humming was Joanna's, and she stood at the stove, Emily balanced on her hip as she stirred something in a pot. Sarah sat at the table, watching with rapt attention as Joanna taught her how to fold napkins into shapes. "Good morning," Joanna said when she noticed him awake. I hope you don't mind, but I found some oats and dried apples in your pantry. Zane stood, suddenly conscious of his rumpled appearance. No, I don't mind, thank you. Thomas burst through the door, his boots muddy. Pa, the creek's risen real high from the rain. It's washed out part of the road to town. Zane ran a hand through his hair. That's not good news for Miss Oakes, I'm afraid. Joanna's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly. Well, I suppose I'll just have to make myself useful here until the road is passable again, if that's acceptable to you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Before he could respond, Sarah piped up. Can she stay forever, Pa? She makes things pretty again. A flush crept up Joanna's neck at the child's words. Zane noticed that she had indeed been busy. The cabin was tidier than it had been in months, with fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table and the dishes washed and put away. Let's start with breakfast, Zane said diplomatically, and then I'll ride out to see about your wagon. After breakfast, Zane saddled his horse while Joanna insisted on staying with the children. I'll tidy up a bit more, she promised, and perhaps Sarah can show me where the garden is. I noticed some vegetables might be ready for harvesting. The garden, Zane had neglected it shamefully since Martha's death, managing only the bare minimum to keep the plants alive. It's not in the best shape, he admitted. All gardens need is a little attention, she said kindly. We'll manage. As Zane rode along the mudded road, he found himself thinking about Joanna's quiet competence, the way she'd stepped into their lives and immediately begun to fill needs he hadn't even acknowledged. The children had taken to her instantly, especially Emily, who rarely allowed strangers to hold her. He found Joanna's wagon about 3 miles down the road, its left wheel broken beyond simple repair. The contents, several trunks and boxes, appeared undisturbed, protected by oilcloth. He loaded what he could onto his horse and marked the location of the rest to retrieve later. When he returned to the cabin, he found a transformation underway. Laundry hung on the line, flapping in the gentle breeze. The porch had been swept, and through the open door, he could see that more cleaning had been done inside. From the garden came the sound of laughter, Sarah's high-pitched giggle and Joanna's melodious chuckle. He followed the sound to find them kneeling in the dirt, harvesting carrots and turnips. Sarah's face was alight with joy, an expression he hadn't seen since before Martha's death. Thomas sat nearby, whittling a stick but clearly enjoying the company. Your wagon needs a new wheel, Zane announced as he approached. I've brought some of your things, but the rest will have to wait until I can get the wagon itself. Joanna stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Thank you for checking. I hope it wasn't too much trouble. The road to town is indeed washed out in places, he continued. It might be a few days before it's passable for a wagon. Instead of disappointment, he thought he detected a flash of relief in her eyes. Then I hope you won't mind my company a while longer, she said. I've sent a letter to the school board in Willow Creek with a passing rider to explain my delay. That evening, they dined on a stew made from the vegetables Joanna and Sarah had harvested, along with some of the remaining bread. The cabin felt warmer somehow, despite the cooling evening air. The children chattered more than they had in months, eager to share their day's activities with their father. Miss Joanna knows stories, Pa, Sarah informed him. Lots and lots of them. Is that so? Zane raised an eyebrow at their guest. Joanna smiled. Just simple tales my mother used to tell, nothing special. Tell Pa the one about the brave horse, Thomas urged, surprising Zane. His oldest had become so serious lately, so determined to be grown up, that he rarely showed enthusiasm for childish things like stories. After dinner, with the children bathed and in their nightclothes, another task Joanna had quietly taken on, they gathered around the hearth. Joanna told the story of a brave horse that saved its owner during a blizzard, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the tale, her hands occasionally gesturing to emphasize a point. Zane watched his children's faces, transfixed by the storyteller. Even baby Emily seemed captivated, her eyes wide as she sat in Joanna's lap. But more often, Zane found his gaze drawn to Joanna herself, the way the firelight played across her features, the expressiveness of her dark eyes, the gentle curve of her lips as she smiled at his children's reactions. When the story ended and the children were tucked into bed, Zane and Joanna sat at the table with cups of coffee between them. "You have a way with them," he said quietly. "They haven't been this animated since their mother died." Joanna's expression softened with sympathy. "Children are resilient, Mr. Fitzgerald. They just need stability and love." "Zane," he corrected her. "Please call me Zane. After all, you're sleeping in my bed." The moment the words left his mouth, he felt heat rise to his face. "I didn't mean," but Joanna was laughing softly, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "I understood your meaning, Zane." The way she said his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. They talked late into the night, Joanna sharing stories of her childhood on a farm in Ohio, her decision to become a teacher, and her journey west after her father's death left her brothers in charge of the family property. "And you?" she asked eventually. "How did you come to be here?" Zane stared into his coffee cup. "Martha and I came out from Pennsylvania 12 years ago. I had dreams of building something of my own, away from the coal mines where my father and grandfather died. We started with nothing but a tent and determination." "You've built something beautiful," Joanna said sincerely. "This land, this home, it's clear how much love went into creating it." "It was Martha who made it a home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just put up the walls." Joanna reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture so unexpected that Zane nearly pulled away. "She must have been an extraordinary woman." "She was," he agreed, finding it strangely easier to speak of Martha with this woman who had never known her. "But I'm failing at maintaining what she created. The children deserve better than what I've been giving them." "You're doing the best you can," Joanna assured him. "Grief takes its own time, Zane. There's no schedule for healing." In the days that followed, Joanna's presence continued to breathe life back into the Fitzgerald home. She established a routine that brought order to their previously chaotic existence: regular meals, designated times for chores and play, even impromptu lessons for Thomas and Sarah that had them eagerly learning in ways they never had before. Zane found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the gentle way she braided Sarah's hair, her patience as she taught Thomas to write better, the natural grace with which she moved through the cabin that had once felt so empty. On the 4th day of her stay, Zane returned from checking the cattle to find Joanna at the clothesline, hanging freshly washed linens. Emily was nearby in a basket, cooing at a butterfly that had landed on the edge. "The road to town should be passable tomorrow," he said as he approached, surprised by his own reluctance to deliver this news. Joanna's hands stilled on the sheet she was hanging. "Oh, that's good news." But neither of them sounded convinced. "The thing is," Zane continued, stepping closer, "the children have grown quite attached to you." She turned to face him, a clothespin still in her hand. "And I to them." "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that perhaps you might consider staying on a bit longer, as a paid position, of course. The children need looking after, and with the ranch work, I can't give them the attention they deserve." Hope flickered in Joanna's eyes, quickly replaced by uncertainty. "But my teaching position in Willow Creek." "You could still teach," he suggested. "Thomas and Sarah need education, and I'm sure other ranching families nearby would pay to have their children taught as well. You could establish a small school right here." The idea, which had come to him suddenly, seemed more perfect the more he considered it. "You wouldn't have to live in town among strangers. You'd have a home here with people who have come to care for you." Joanna's eyes widened at his words, a blush spreading across her cheeks. "That's a generous offer, Zane, but I wouldn't want to intrude on your family's grief." "Your wife would have wanted the children to be happy," he finished for her. "And they are, with you here, happier than they've been in 8 months." A gentle breeze lifted a strand of Joanna's dark hair, and without thinking, Zane reached out to tuck it behind her ear. His fingers lingered near her cheek, and for a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. "I should think about it," she said softly, not pulling away from his touch. "Of course," he agreed, letting his hand drop. "Take all the time you need." That night, after the children were asleep, Zane found Joanna sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars. He joined her, offering a shawl which she gratefully wrapped around her shoulders. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said after a comfortable silence. "It's very tempting, but—" He prompted, sensing her hesitation. She turned to look at him directly. "But I need to know if it's just the children you're thinking of, or if there's something more to your invitation." The directness of her question caught him off guard. In his mind, he'd been carefully separating his growing feelings for Joanna from his practical need for help with the children. To have her address the unspoken so boldly was both terrifying and liberating. "I won't deny that I've come to admire you," he admitted carefully. "But I would never presume. I'm not asking for presumptions," she interrupted gently. "Just honesty." Zane took a deep breath. "Honestly, then, when you came to our door that night, I was lost, drowning in grief and responsibility. You brought more than warm bread, Joanna. You brought light back into this home." He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of hard work. "I don't know what these feelings mean yet. I loved Martha with everything I had, and part of me feels that even noticing another woman is a betrayal of her memory. But another part recognizes that life continues," Joanna finished for him. "And that finding joy again doesn't diminish what you had before." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Zane felt something shift within him, not an ending to his grief, but perhaps the beginning of healing. "Stay," he said simply. "Not just for the children, for me as well. Give us time to see what might grow between us, slowly and respectfully." Joanna's smile was like the dawn breaking. "I think I'd like that very much." The next morning, they rode into Willow Creek together to speak with the school board. Joanna explained her new plan to establish a small school that would serve the outlying ranches, with the full support of Zane Fitzgerald, one of the area's respected ranchers. To Zane's surprise, the board was receptive to the idea. The previous schoolteacher had left abruptly, and finding someone willing to come to such a remote location had been challenging. They agreed to provide books and a small stipend if Joanna could guarantee at least 10 students. "I believe we can meet that number," Zane assured them, thinking of the neighboring families who struggled to educate their children. As they left the meeting, Joanna's face was alight with excitement. "I can't believe they agreed so readily. Now I just need to find enough students." "Leave that to me," Zane said confidently. "The Hendersons have 4 children of school age, the Wilsons have 3, and with Thomas and Sarah, that's 9 already. I'm sure we can find at least one more." They stopped at the general store to purchase supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and fabric for new clothes for the children. The store owner, Mr. Peterson, raised his eyebrows at the sight of Zane with a woman by his side, but said nothing beyond a polite greeting. His wife was less restrained. "Zane Fitzgerald, aren't you going to introduce us to your friend?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her curious eyes taking in Joanna's simple but neat appearance. "This is Miss Joanna Oakes," Zane said, noticing the way Joanna straightened her shoulders under the woman's scrutiny. "She's going to be teaching school for the children in the outlying areas." "Is that so?" Mrs. Peterson's gaze darted between them. "And where will you be staying, Miss Oakes?" Before Joanna could answer, Zane spoke firmly. "Miss Oakes will be staying at my ranch, where we'll be setting up the schoolroom. My children need education, and Miss Oakes needs accommodation. It's a practical arrangement." Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows nearly reached her hairline. "I see. How convenient." Later, as they loaded their purchases into Zane's wagon, Joanna was quiet. "People will talk," she finally said. "A single woman living in the home of a widower." Zane secured the last crate before turning to her. "People always talk, Joanna. What matters is what's true." "And what is true?" she asked softly. He helped her up onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. That you are a respectable schoolteacher who is providing a much-needed service to this community, that my children deserve education and motherly care. And that whatever grows between us will be honorable and at a pace we both find comfortable. The ride back to the ranch was filled with planning where to set up the schoolroom, how to notify potential families, what supplies they would need. By the time they arrived home, where a neighbor had been watching the children, they had a solid plan in place. Thomas and Sarah rushed out to meet them, faces bright with excitement at the gifts. Zane had purchased a new book for Thomas and a doll for Sarah. Even little Emily seemed to sense the change in mood, babbling happily from Thomas's arms. "Are you staying with us, Miss Joanna?" Thomas asked directly, his young face serious. Joanna knelt to his level. "Yes, Thomas. I'm going to be your teacher, and I'll be living here to help your father take care of you and your sisters." Sarah's eyes widened. "Forever and ever." Joanna glanced up at Zane, who was watching the exchange with a soft expression. "We'll see what the future brings," she answered diplomatically. "But for now, yes, I'm staying." Over the next few weeks, the Fitzgerald ranch underwent a transformation. The small storage room attached to the main cabin was cleared out and converted into a classroom, with a blackboard Zane built himself and desks fashioned from crates and planks. Word spread, and soon 12 children were enrolled in Joanna's school, which would meet 3 days a week. Joanna herself settled into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She established her own space in what had been Martha's sewing room, respecting both Zane's memories and the propriety expected by their neighbors. During the day, she taught the children or tended to the household. In the evenings, she and Zane would sit on the porch or by the fire, talking long into the night. Slowly, cautiously, they circled closer to one another. A brush of hands while passing the coffee pot. A shared smile over Sarah's antics. The way Zane began to linger in the doorway of the classroom, watching Joanna teach with passion and patience. One evening in late September, as the leaves began to turn golden on the aspens that lined the creek, Zane found Joanna hanging the last of the day's laundry as the sun set behind the mountains. "You've brought order to chaos," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for us." Joanna secured a sheet to the line before turning to face him. "You don't need to thank me, Zane. Being here with you and the children, it's given me purpose, a sense of belonging I haven't felt since my mother died." In the fading light, her face was softened, her dark eyes reflecting the golden sunset. Zane found himself stepping closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "Joanna," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "I find myself thinking about you in ways that go beyond gratitude." Her breath caught, but she didn't step away. "I've been thinking about you too." Carefully, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Zane reached for her hand. Her fingers were warm as they twined with his, a simple touch that somehow felt more intimate than anything he'd experienced in years. "I'm not looking to replace Martha," he said, needing her to understand. "What we had can't be duplicated, but I believe there's room in a heart for new love that doesn't diminish the old." "I would never want to replace her," Joanna assured him. "But I hope there might be space for something new to grow between us." As the last light faded from the sky, Zane leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, chaste, respectful, but full of promise. Joanna closed her eyes, her free hand coming to rest lightly on his chest. "We should go inside," she whispered after a moment. "The children will be wondering where we are." That night, as they sat around the table for dinner, Zane noticed a different quality to their interactions, a heightened awareness, a sense of possibilities unfolding. The children seemed to sense it too, watching the adults with curious eyes as they exchanged small smiles across the table. Fall gave way to winter, and as the first snow blanketed the ranch, the small schoolhouse Zane had built adjacent to the main cabin was completed. With its own entrance and stove, it provided a proper setting for Joanna's growing number of students, now 15 in total. Christmas approached, bringing with it both joy and melancholy. It would be the first Christmas without Martha, a fact that weighed heavily on Zane as he watched his children help Joanna decorate the cabin with pine boughs and red ribbons. She loved Christmas, he told Joanna one evening as they sat by the fire after the children were asleep. She would spend weeks preparing, making gifts and special treats. Joanna reached for his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Then we should honor her by making it special for the children. They deserve happy memories, Zane. With her encouragement, Zane found himself embracing the season rather than dreading it. Together, they planned surprises for the children, new mittens knitted by Joanna. A wooden horse Zane carved for Thomas, a set of jacks for Sarah, and a soft stuffed bear for Emily. On Christmas Eve, after a simple but festive dinner, they gathered around the fire to exchange gifts. The children's delight at their presence filled the cabin with laughter that eased the ache in Zane's heart. "We have something for you too, Miss Joanna," Thomas announced, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Joanna unwrapped it carefully to reveal a crudely fashioned but heartfelt picture frame, containing a drawing of the Fitzgerald family: Zane, Thomas, Sarah, and Emily, with Joanna standing beside them, all holding hands. "We're all holding hands because we're a family now," Sarah explained earnestly. "That's what Tommy says." Tears filled Joanna's eyes as she looked at the drawing, then at the children's hopeful faces. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Later, after the children were tucked into bed with visions of sugar plums, Zane and Joanna sat close together on the sofa, the cabin quiet except for the crackling of the fire. "I have something for you," Zane said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with flowers and vines. "I've been working on this for weeks." Joanna took the box, running her fingers over the detailed carving. "It's beautiful, Zane. Open it," he urged softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver ring with a small pearl. Simple but elegant, it gleamed in the firelight. Joanna's eyes widened as she looked from the ring to Zane's face. "What is this?" "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother gave it to me before we came west, saying I should save it for something important." He took a deep breath. "Joanna, these past months with you have shown me that life can begin again, even after the deepest loss. You've brought joy back to this home and to my heart." He took the box from her hands and removed the ring. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I know it hasn't been that long, and there's still healing to be done. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, this belongs to you." Joanna's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Zane, you don't have to wear it yet," he continued quickly. "Just keep it as a promise of what could be. When the time is right, if you decide that this is what you want to, then we can make it official." Joanna looked at the ring for a long moment, then slowly extended her left hand. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "I know what's in my heart." With trembling fingers, Zane slipped the ring onto her hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Are you certain?" he asked, hardly daring to believe. Instead of answering with words, Joanna leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, their first real kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "I believe that's a yes," Zane whispered, drawing her close again. They decided to wait until spring for the wedding, giving the children more time to adjust to the idea and allowing proper preparations to be made. When they announced their engagement to the children the next morning, the reactions were mixed but predominantly positive. "Does this mean you'll be our new mother?" Sarah asked Joanna directly. Joanna knelt before the child, taking her small hands. "I would be honored to be your mother, Sarah, but I know that you already have a mother who loved you very much. I won't ever try to take her place in your heart. There's room to love us both." Thomas, more reserved, simply nodded. "Pa seems happy again," he observed, "and you make good biscuits." Coming from Thomas, this was high praise indeed, and both adults struggled not to laugh. Baby Emily, now 16 months old and toddling everywhere, simply held up her arms to Joanna, her face alight with a smile that was so like Martha's that it made Zane's heart ache, even as it filled with joy for this new beginning. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the scattered community. Most responses were positive. The Henderson family even brought over a quilt as an early wedding gift, but there were some who whispered that it was too soon, that Zane was dishonoring Martha's memory. These whispers reached Joanna through Mrs. Peterson when she visited the general store in February. "Some folks think you took advantage of a grieving man," the woman said bluntly as she measured fabric for a new dress Joanna was planning. Joanna's hands stilled on the bolt of calico she was examining. "I'm sorry they feel that way," she said evenly, "but Zane and I know what's in our hearts." "Martha was well loved in this community," Mrs. Peterson continued, her scissors snipping with unnecessary force. "Not just anyone can step into her shoes." "I'm not trying to," Joanna replied, lifting her chin. "I'm bringing my own shoes." The woman blinked at this response, then unexpectedly chuckled. "Well said, Miss Oakes. Perhaps you'll do after all." When Joanna related this exchange to Zane that evening, he pulled her into his arms. "You handled that perfectly," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And she's right about one thing, Martha was well loved, but so are you by me and by the children." As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, preparations for the wedding accelerated. Joanna worked on a new dress in the evenings, white calico with lace she'd carefully saved from her mother's wedding gown. Zane, with Thomas's help, built a larger bed frame for the main bedroom, which would soon be theirs to share. Sarah took to following Joanna everywhere, asking endless questions about the wedding and what it would be like to have a real mother again. Emily, too young to understand the coming changes, nonetheless seemed to sense the excitement, clapping her hands whenever Joanna tried on her partially completed wedding dress. March brought the first signs of spring crocuses pushing through the melting snow, birds returning from their winter migrations, and calves being born in the pastures. The ranch came alive again, mirroring the renewal happening within the Fitzgerald family. One evening, as Zane and Joanna walked along the creek behind the cabin, he surprised her by pulling her close for a kiss that was more passionate than their usually restrained displays of affection. "What was that for?" she asked breathlessly when they parted. "For being you," he said simply. "For bringing spring back to my life when I thought it would be winter forever." Joanna's eyes softened as she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that grief and hard work had etched there. "I never expected to find this kind of happiness," she admitted. "When my wagon broke down in that storm, I thought it was the worst luck. And now I think it might have been divine intervention," she said with a smile. "Or at the very least, a very fortunate accident." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed for new beginnings. The small church in Willow Creek was filled with neighbors and friends, many of whom had initially been skeptical, but had come to appreciate the positive changes in both Zane and his children since Joanna's arrival. Thomas, solemn in his best shirt, stood proudly beside his father at the altar. Sarah, her hair braided with wildflowers, could barely contain her excitement as she waited with Emily, who toddled around in a new dress Joanna had sewn for the occasion. When Joanna appeared at the back of the church, a simple bouquet of spring flowers in her hands, Zane felt his breath catch. She was beautiful not just in her white dress with its touches of lace, but in the joy that radiated from her as their eyes met across the small church. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. They had written their own vows, promises not just to each other, but to the family they were creating together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zane's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward, held at the ranch with tables set up under the trees, was filled with laughter, music, and the kind of genuine joy that comes from witnessing love triumph over loss. The children moved easily between the guests, accepting congratulations and sharing their excitement about their new mother. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the gathered community, Zane found Joanna standing slightly apart, watching the children play with some of their school friends. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," he said, coming to stand beside her. "How does it feel?" She turned to him, her face alight with happiness. "Wonderful, perfect, like coming home after a long journey." He drew her close, no longer concerned about propriety now that their union was official. "That's exactly what it is," he murmured against her hair. "You've come home to us, and we to you." The guests departed as darkness fell, leaving the newlyweds alone with the children for their first night as an official family. After the excitement of the day, the children fell asleep quickly, leaving Zane and Joanna to retire to their room, no longer his room or her room, but theirs together. Later, as they lay entwined in the new bed Zane had built, Joanna traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "Dangerous," he teased, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. She smiled in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I was thinking about expanding the school. There are more families moving into the valley, and the current room won't accommodate many more students." Zane propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with admiration. "You're thinking about work on our wedding night. Not just work," she corrected. "Our future. The legacy we'll build together." He considered this, nodding slowly. "A larger school would be good for the community. I could start on the plans this summer. And," she continued, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "I was thinking we might need more room in the house as well. For additions to our family." Zane's heart skipped a beat as he realized what she was suggesting. "You want children of our own. I already love Thomas, Sarah, and Emily as if they were my own," she assured him quickly. "But yes, if God wills it, I would like to have a child with you. A living symbol of our love." Overcome with emotion, Zane gathered her close. "Nothing would make me happier," he whispered against her hair. Spring turned to summer, and the expanded schoolhouse took shape under Zane's skilled hands. Joanna's student population grew to 20, requiring the hiring of an assistant teacher, a young woman from Helena, who boarded with the Henderson family. As the weather warmed, life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Zane tended the ranch with Thomas increasingly by his side, learning the skills he would need as a man. Joanna divided her time between teaching and homemaking, with Sarah as her eager apprentice in both cooking and gardening. Emily continued to grow and thrive, her vocabulary expanding daily under the loving attention of both parents. In late June, as they celebrated their 3-month anniversary with a picnic by the creek, Joanna shared the news she'd been suspecting for weeks. She was expecting a child, due to arrive in the early spring. Zane's joy was boundless, his protective instincts immediately heightened. "You should rest more," he insisted, even as Joanna laughed at his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I'm perfectly capable of continuing my normal activities for now." The children's reactions to the news varied. Thomas, now 11, accepted it with the serious nod that was becoming his trademark expression. Sarah was ecstatic at the prospect of another sibling. Emily, still too young to fully understand, simply patted Joanna's still flat stomach and said, "Baby." As summer faded into fall, Joanna's condition became more visible, and Zane found himself watching her with a mixture of awe and anxiety. The memories of Martha's difficult delivery and subsequent death lurked at the edges of his mind, though he tried to keep his fears from Joanna. But she knew him too well by now. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took his hand and placed it on her rounded belly where their child kicked vigorously. "I'm not Martha," she said gently, addressing the unspoken fear that had been growing between them. "My mother had 6 healthy children with no complications. There's no reason to believe I won't be fine." Zane let out a shaky breath. "I know that, logically, but the fear is still there." "Then we'll face it together," she said firmly. I've already spoken with Mrs. Henderson, who was a midwife back east before she married. She'll attend the birth, and Dr. Williams from Willow Creek has promised to be available if needed. Her practical approach eased some of Zane's anxiety, though he knew it wouldn't fully disappear until she and the baby were safely through the delivery. As winter descended on the ranch, bringing with it short days and long nights, the cabin was filled with warmth and anticipation. The children helped prepare for the new arrival, with Thomas building a small cradle under his father's guidance, and Sarah knitting tiny booties with Joanna's help. Christmas that year was especially joyful, a stark contrast to the previous year's more subdued celebration. The cabin rang with laughter and music as neighbors visited to share holiday cheer and admire Joanna's expanding figure. "You're glowing," Mrs. Peterson remarked during her visit, her earlier reservations about Joanna apparently forgotten. "Motherhood suits you, Mrs. Fitzgerald." "Thank you," Joanna replied sincerely. "I feel blessed beyond measure." January brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. School sessions were suspended until the weather improved, giving Joanna time to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival. Zane insisted on taking over more of the household duties, much to the amusement of the children. "Pa burned the biscuits again," Thomas reported one morning, his expression a mixture of dismay and resignation. "Your father is doing his best," Joanna defended, though she couldn't help laughing at Zane's chagrined expression. Besides, a few burned biscuits are a small price to pay for his help. February brought milder weather and the resumption of school for the other children in the area. Joanna, now in her final month of pregnancy, supervised while her assistant did most of the actual teaching. Her energy waned as the baby grew, but her spirits remained high. "I feel like I've been pregnant forever," she confessed to Zane one evening as he massaged her swollen feet. "Though I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Just a little longer," he encouraged, his hands gentle on her tender skin. "Soon we'll be holding our child." The baby arrived on a clear, cold night in early March, announcing its impending arrival with contractions that woke Joanna from a sound sleep. Mrs. Henderson was summoned, arriving just as dawn broke over the mountains. Zane paced outside the bedroom, the memories of Martha's labor haunting him despite his best efforts to remain calm. Thomas sat stoically at the table, while Sarah and Emily were sent to stay with neighbors until the ordeal was over. Inside the bedroom, Joanna labored with determination, drawing on an inner strength that impressed even the experienced midwife. Unlike Martha's difficult delivery, Joanna's proceeded relatively smoothly, though it was still long and arduous. As the sun reached its zenith, a lusty cry finally pierced the tension-filled cabin. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the bedroom door, her face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Fitzgerald, you have a healthy son." Zane's knees nearly buckled with relief and joy. "And Joanna?" "Tired but well," the midwife assured him. "She's asking for you." He entered the bedroom to find Joanna propped up against the pillows, her face radiant despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," she said softly as Zane approached the bed with reverent steps. He sat carefully beside her, afraid to disturb either mother or child. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny fists clenched as if ready to take on the world. "He's perfect," Zane whispered, gently touching the infant's cheek with one finger. "Just like his mother." Joanna leaned against him, her strength beginning to wane now that the ordeal was over. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings, but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at his son's face, Zane knew. "Matthew," he said. "It means gift from God, because that's what he is, what you both are." Joanna smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "Matthew Fitzgerald. It's perfect." The days that followed were a blend of exhaustion and joy as the family adjusted to its newest member. Thomas, Sarah, and Emily were each introduced to their baby brother, with reactions ranging from Thomas's solemn promise to teach him to ride when he was old enough, to Sarah's endless questions about why he was so red and wrinkly, to Emily's simple declaration that he was pretty. Spring arrived in earnest as Matthew grew stronger, bringing with it new calves in the pastures and fresh green shoots in Joanna's garden. The expanded schoolhouse was completed and filled with eager students, though Joanna took a few months away from teaching to focus on her recovering body and her growing baby. On a warm day in May, as the wildflowers carpeted the meadows surrounding the ranch, Zane found Joanna sitting on a blanket under an old oak tree, Matthew nursing contentedly at her breast while the other children played nearby. He sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders and drawing her close. "Happy?" he asked, though he could see the answer in her serene expression. "Completely," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "I never imagined life could be this full." They watched as Thomas helped Emily chase butterflies, while Sarah carefully arranged wildflowers into a crown. The scene was so peaceful, so perfect, that Zane felt his throat tighten with emotion. "When you knocked on our door that stormy night with your warm bread," he said softly, "you saved us, not just from hunger, but from the loneliness that was consuming us." Joanna adjusted Matthew, who had fallen asleep, his tiny face relaxed in contentment. "And you saved me from a life of solitude," she replied. "I might have been a good teacher in Willow Creek, but I would never have known what it meant to be truly part of a family again." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the meadow, Zane helped Joanna to her feet, cradling sleeping Matthew while she gathered the blanket. Thomas rounded up his sisters, and together the Fitzgerald family walked back toward the cabin that had once been filled with grief, but was now overflowing with love. The light glowed golden in the windows, welcoming them home not just to a place, but to each other, to the family they had forged through chance, choice, and the courage to begin again. Years later, when asked how they had found such happiness after such sorrow, Zane would always tell the story of a stormy night, a broken wagon wheel, and a woman who arrived on his doorstep with warm bread and a heart open to possibility. And Joanna would smile, thinking of how the worst luck of her life, a broken wheel on a muddy road, had led her to the greatest joy she could have imagined. A family pieced together from broken parts that had become stronger at the mended places. As they approached the cabin, Matthew stirred in his father's arms, opening eyes that held the promise of all their tomorrows. Zane looked at his son, then at the woman beside him, and knew with absolute certainty that sometimes healing comes in unexpected forms sometimes. It comes with warm bread and the courage to open the door to a storm-drenched stranger. And in that opening, in that moment of kindness and need, love finds its way home.